Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. I'm pleased to welcome Matt Wash and Konrad Sobon from Bimbeats back to the podcast. Though they've both appeared separately before, you'll find links to their previous episodes in the show notes. Today, they join me together to explore several key topics: their personal journeys and evolving roles within their company, Bimbeats, how firms handle challenges around communication, training, and accountability, the importance of understanding a company's digital footprint for decision-making and transformation, and their insights on using data to boost productivity and increase business performance. Real quick, before we get into today's conversation, do me a favor, and if you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe to the show wherever you watch or listen, so YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. And leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help people find the show, which is important to me so that I can keep finding great guests to interview. You can also support the mission here by becoming a paid member at trxl.co. Just click the join button in the lower right-hand corner or the subscribe button at the top or the bottom of any page on the site. If you'd like to receive an email from me when new updates are published with all the links and other information as they come out, sign up for that by becoming either a free or paid member at TRXL. And speaking of email and memberships, one of the perks of a paid membership is my Leadership Edge newsletter, in which I provide key insights for forward thinkers who are seeking innovation in AEC but are short on time. They're designed to keep you updated, spark your interest, and encourage you to tune in to the corresponding episodes if the ideas resonate. Leadership Edge newsletters are only available to paid members of Troxel Plus, and you can become one at trxl.co. To get a taste of what's on offer, search for Leadership Edge on trxl.co for previously published examples. This was a great conversation with Konrad and Matt, and there's an extensive amount of additional information in the show notes if you'd like to go deeper, so be sure to check those out. They're in your podcast app if you're a paid member, or if you're a free member, you can find them on the website. And so now, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Konrad Sobon and Matt Wash. Today, I'm joined by Matt Wash and Konrad Sobon. So it's been a while since both of you have been on the podcast on different occasions, never together like this for the first time. So you guys are both working at Bimbeats. Konrad has been at Bimbeats for a while. Matt was at Bimbeats, went away from Bimbeats. He's back at Bimbeats as the CEO, and I think we'll hear a little bit of that story in a minute. But Konrad, you were one of the, I want to say you were like episode 7 or something. I didn't actually go back and look, but that's just what my memory says. And so it's been a while since you've been on the show. Catch us up on what life has been like for the last few years. This podcast is 4.5 years old, so it's been at least 4 years since we had that conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Last 4.5 years. So this was right after we moved from New York. So a little bit after the pandemic, right? So Bimbeats just kicked off. We're very, very much a startup at the time. So a lot of things have changed since then. I mean, for me, probably the biggest thing has been just growing as a company and hiring people. I've never done this in the past, so figuring out how to kind of switch from just head down and coding and working in that mode a little bit more to managing. That's been a big challenge. So I'm happy to have Matt with me now to help out with that a little bit more, but
balance the load, right?
Yeah. So we've grown a little bit. Work-wise, I still pretty much do similar things that I've done 4 or 5 years ago. It's just a lot more of Bimbeats, a little bit less on the consulting side of things with Arcol. And I got 2 daughters now. Probably 4.5 years ago, I only had one, a little baby, right. But now I got 2 daughters, and the older one just turned 5. So that's those are interesting times.
Keeping you extra busy with all that.
Oh yeah. And I mean, my wife and I recently looked at some old pictures when she was born, and I'm like laying on the couch with her, and I had a full head of hair, I've got myself up to the receding hairline status, and I definitely was not going gray at the time just yet. So that caught up to me pretty quick.
It happens to us all. And then there's those people who like to hide it, but not me. Just full silver streaks on this side of the. You can charge more. That's what I've been told. Is that the more gray you have, the more you should be able to charge because it's experience. It's like right there.
Yeah, the seasoned vet right now.
Seasoned vet, nice.
Although my wife tells me to keep it trimmed and keep it short because I look a little too old, maybe.
Nice. So tell us kind of what has happened at Bimbeats from in your role over the last 4.5 years since we talked last. Just in terms of maybe scale a little bit because that's one of the things I've always been so interested in with what you guys are doing specifically. And so like historically, you started out by providing metrics into different applications on the computer. And so maybe just give us kind of a baseline for those people maybe who aren't familiar with you at all, what Bimbeats is about, and then how you've seen it change over the last 4.5 years before we jump over to Matt. Sorry, Matt. I'm not trying to ignore you yet, but I think there's something here to just kind of set the table for this conversation.
Sure. So how about I go back in time a little bit, jump into a time machine, and in my days as a BIM manager, that's really where the idea for Bimbeats and kind of generally some kind of data analytics platform came to mind. So these were my days of just regular BIM coordination, BIM management jobs that I was doing. I think with Grimshaw at the time, and we were a relatively small office, so I would have whatever projects were in the office. We're splitting that between myself and my manager Greg. And then, it's just deadline after deadline. You're working pretty much every Friday is a deadline. So, you're running 4, 5, 6 projects at a time. And I was like, yeah, it's just, it's too much. Like I can't keep up with all of the different projects, all of the different models. How do you do that without having to go into all of those different models? And then, at the time I didn't have much kind of programming skills to go off of and just build a platform per se. So we started off with Dynamo scripts, right? And that didn't scale too much, but then eventually over the years, build out some other tools. When I worked at HOK, we spent a lot of time working again with my manager Greg. I've had luck with Greg's. So, Greg Schleusner and I were working at something called Mission Control at the time. And, that was a different spin and different approach at trying to pull data automatically. So there's a BIM manager, you can kind of have a quick look into the models. And at the time, the conversation was always, you're kind of building the tools for yourself always. So the conversation was Revit, because as a BIM manager, that's what you're really interested in is, but as the scale grew, and after HOK, we started working on Bimbeats with Adam, and the idea then kind of turned is like, why don't we scale horizontally? So it wasn't just about Revit and model health metrics from Revit files at a time. We started talking about pulling data from all sorts of other applications, right? And 4.5 years ago, maybe. This was just Revit Dynamo and maybe Rhino Grasshopper at the time. Since then, we're probably up to, a dozen different sources of data. Just recently pushed out a new integration for ArcGIS. Obviously, we do AutoCAD, Navisworks, all kinds of standalone applications that pull data from your computer about the hardware, about the processes that you're running on the computer. Just ton of different sources of data. So we kind of scaled that horizontally. So it's no longer just like a model health metrics platform as it was originally. In order to aid BIM managers, right now it's more of a digital footprint for the company, and you can use it for all kinds of different things.
And it really ends up telling a lot more of the story, right? Like model health is not the entire story, right? And so you've got performance, like hardware performance, right? All kinds of additional insights that you're kind of pulling from to tell a broader story so that you can really understand like what's going on with the quote unquote health or maybe fitness of the digital footprint of your company as you're working on delivering these projects.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, you want to jump in? Because so Matt, before kind of assuming the role of a CEO, he actually worked on as a on the client side of things. So he has a unique perspective on the actual application and use cases for Bimbeats. So I'm gonna
Yeah,
let him.
let's throw it over to Matt, who is definitely the CEO because he's wearing the uniform. He's got his Bimbeats shirt on. He's doing his marketing really well today. So Matt, yeah, give us an update on. You've also been on the show previously, and you were at Bimbeats at the time. You went away from Bimbeats, came back. I'd love to hear a little bit behind that, but maybe we start with where Konrad just led, which was you were actually like in a firm using this kind of stuff, and I think go ahead and jump off and let's hear it. Let's hear about it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do a quick summary of what we spoke about last time. So this was when I first got involved with Bimbeats was, I'm a good friend of Adam Sheether. Adam lives in Brisbane. We talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And I was explaining to him a problem that I had. I was a design technology leader of BVN architects. And our challenge was really understanding why Revit was crashing regularly and how we could get to the bottom of that. And I just kept saying, look, it was taking up so much of my time trying to analyze journal files and work out, was it the RAM? Was it the infrastructure? Was it the model? Was it the competency of the user? All of these different things. And that's when he said, oh, look, we're building this tool that will be basically able to solve all of those problems. So I'm like, wow, sweet. Let's just implement that. So we worked on, I think we were the first client of Bimbeats. And back then, if you've ever read Eric Ries's The Lean Startup, these guys definitely achieved pushing out that minimum viable product. In that it was aiming to solve one of the biggest problems we had within the office. Were the dashboards any good? No, the dashboards were not good. Did we really know how we were passing the data and all the different index patterns? No, not really. But having Adam there and getting regular feedback, we constantly iterated on the product and we got it to a point where we were automating alerts so that when Revit was crashing, it was automatically sending a help desk ticket to our IT team, which then told them was the RAM, at capacity, was the hard drive at capacity, what was the user doing prior to the crash. So all of the metrics that I was doing manually was now being captured automatically. Obviously, we didn't solve every single crash. There was too many variables, but we did get to the bottom of a few key things that we were then able to action, make some changes, and then use Bimbeats to look at frequency of crashing, obviously, as the key metric. Has that come down? But then we really started unpacking, well, what is the business impact of what we're doing in terms of how much time are we wasting opening files and saving files? They were the two real key metrics. And to start with, when we would present back to leadership, it was all around model health and a traffic light dashboard, but didn't mean anything in terms of commercial aspect of the business. And it didn't really talk about competency profiling and skills gap analysis, which were the two real things that we needed to address. So I did that for a while at BVN. And then because I started unpacking a lot of these insights, Konrad and Adam said, look, you've probably got the most experience of this tool in the industry and with the use of it. How about you come and join us and start developing it with us and talking to our clients and doing exactly what you've done at BVN, but now for everybody. So then I started working with a company called ADG, engineers in Brisbane who were a client of Bimbeats. And they said, we've had Bimbeats for a couple of years now. We know that it's providing all of this useful data, but we're really not understanding what we can do with it. We're really not getting the benefit out of it. Do you know someone that could come into the business and play that role of really trying to analyze what it's doing and how we can get benefits for the bottom line of the business, but really to address their biggest problem, which was burnout and retention of staff. That was and it's an industry-wide problem, but it was also one of their biggest challenges. So I said, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I think we can probably solve this. It isn't going to happen overnight because this extends far beyond just the technology. This is now talking about people and culture. This is talking about the three things that, ironically, this morning on my commute into work, I've just read Nate Miller's post. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, it is awesome. It got posted on LinkedIn this morning. But he talks about three things. He talks about being smart, being healthy, and being fit. And the being smart bit is that you have the right tools within the businesses, you have your processes, you have your systems in place. Then you talk about the health, and the health is all about the culture of the business. And it's not relying just on a few individuals who are passionate about the technology. It's got to be the entire business supporting this. And then from a fitness point of view, you've got to measure the success of this. Like, in order for it to have long-term success, you've got to have those three components. And that final piece, the fitness piece, is the one thing that I think Bimbeats does really, really well. That we can buy the software, we can write the processes, and we can do the culture, which is the hard bit. But measuring the benefits to the business was the one thing that over the last 2 years before I took the role as CEO was, how do I communicate this to the C-suite within this organization that those three things need to come together, but it's really about that measurable benefit at the end in terms of people, so the health of the people and the health of the business. So then it started looking, and none of this really was related to Revit, believe it or not, because Bimbeats looks at every single process that's running on the machine in terms of software and web applications. What we actually started with was, where are we spending our time across the entire business? Let's look at where the effort is. And we found that 20% we're an engineer, or I keep saying we, because I was only there a month ago, an engineering consultancy that does civil, structural, and construction services. And we found that we were spending 20% of the entire business time in PDF markups. And we were like, there's got to be a better way to do PDF markups. There must be ways that we can automate a lot of what we're doing here. So we then started drilling down in Bimbeats, like, what are we doing in Bluebeam? And we found out that we were doing slab reinforcement markups and wall elevation markups. And those two things were contributing to a significant amount of hours. And in fact, in terms of total billable hours, we're 250 people. Bluebeam was costing $10 million of billable time every year. And it's like, great, Bluebeam is an awesome tool for doing digital markups, but what of those digital markups could we do differently? That doesn't mean an engineer is marking something up, giving it to a technician, the technician tracing that, and then giving it backwards and forwards. So we looked at the slab reinforcement markup process, and then we started chatting to people that were doing that process in terms of the engineer and the technician. And then we started revealing all of this duplication of effort and frustration around that process. So we got one of our developers who was a previous, or is still, a structural technician who's been doing reinforcement detailing for 20 years. He's learned how to code, so he knows the problem we're trying to solve. And he built a tool that exports the contextual background from Revit into what we call SmartMark. The engineer comes into our SmartMark application and does a markup as they would do in Bluebeam. But because it's come from Revit, it's got the intelligence of the context of the slab. And as you go to mark up that slab, it understands what type of bars you need to apply, where you need to lap the reinforcement, where you need to crank a bar, because it's got the context to Revit. Then when the markup's finished by the engineer, it just gets sucked directly into Revit and it turns it into Revit componentry that is fully schedulable reinforcement. So we then started tracking the uptake of, well, okay, we now need to train everybody in the new application. So we've written 10 2-minute tutorials that go on the intranet. Within Bimbeats, we can see who's using that application. We can see who's done the training. So I think the most insightful part, and this probably comes back to the cultural piece, is we identified the problem. We solved the problem with the software. But then the next point was, well, how do we integrate this and adopt this as business as usual? So we did a national update to the entire business on Teams. And I had a 10-minute slot to talk about this process and why we were doing it, the metrics behind where we were spending time in Bluebeam and how we could save that time. And I get 10 minutes of an hour slot of like a town hall for 250 people. And I'm probably about 20 minutes into this presentation. So anyway, we deliver the message. We tell them that on the intranet, this is where all of the tutorials are. This is where the application is. Like, here's the expert. We created a Teams channel for feedback. So anything, bugs, whatever, here's where you provide the feedback. And the uptake in the first month was almost non-existent.
I was going to say crickets.
And I'm like,
right?
And I'm like, what's
I've just shown you something. I've just shown you the Holy Grail.
Right? And I'm like, there must be something we're doing wrong here. And I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to look in Bimbeats and look at that Teams meeting. And because we get the title of the screen of the active window during that presentation
at that time,
we can see the engagement. So for the first 2 minutes of our town halls, we have up to about 160, 170 people of the 250 from the company. And then as the minutes go on, it drops off.
No longer the window that's on top, right?
Everyone's got multiple monitors. And then I go and check, everybody's typically back in Revit, back in the structural analysis applications or anything. And by the end of that meeting, 5% of people have actively engaged with that content from start to finish in terms of it being the active window. So that made us think about what's our communication strategy here? Like, what is that meeting about? What's the intention of that meeting? Is it to inform people? And it's if you listen in, great, you learn something. But if you don't, it's okay. Or if we're trying to communicate a message in there that needs to change business behavior that is going to affect an outcome, that platform is obviously not the right platform to do it in. We've got to think of a different way of doing it. But we would never have known that if we didn't look at the data. There was anecdotal evidence that we thought that certain people would, I jump in and I go off and do other things. But it was actually really insightful to see that like 95% of people tune in to start with, and then they obviously kind of tune out as the presentation goes on. So that was when it's like, okay, reinforce the message regularly. And the Bimbeats dashboards were then looked at over time. So month by month, how many people are using the tool, how many people have done the training. And it's taken longer than we thought it would, but it just showed that we've got to continuously reinforce that message and continuously measure it. Because if we assume that we've done all we need to do, really it's got to be that continuous measuring and managing that process. It doesn't just happen. It really comes back. And I guess that comes back to the cultural piece as well. But having our intranet and having Bimbeats capture who's using our intranet and what content on the intranet, that's been really insightful too, because we have one-page gems, and the one-page gem is a summary of something that's really important and critical to the business. And that one-page gem can be read in like 2 or 3 minutes. And the engagement with that content is great. Like everybody reads the gem. When we record lunch and learns and put them on the intranet, literally no one goes back and watches them. So like now, so I guess my point of view in terms of Bimbeats and what I was trying to do with the last 2 years is, as Konrad kind of alluded to, it's not a model health checker tool anymore. Yes, it does all of that, but this is like this digital footprint of your organization and is measuring the success of your digital transformation. And that for me was when I went, wow, like this tool is so powerful. And that was when I said, hey, Konrad, I'm really keen to come back again. What do you think? And Adam had grown Automation, his consulting business, from when I started, there were 4 of us. And that consulting business is now up to 18 people. And Adam's like, oh, mate, please come in and do it, because I am just like exhausted. I just can't do both. So that was when I said, like, yeah, I'd love to come in and do that. And then so I've only been in the role since mid-December. And from mid-December until now, I talk to all of our existing clients and everybody says the same thing. You don't do anything on social media. There's no presence online. When we talk about, no one knows who you are. He's laughing. And then so I said, okay, well, we're going to get someone in to help with marketing. And then she's come in and she's like, how have you grown to the size that you are with these clients with no marketing at all? And I just said, it's just word of mouth. Everything to date has been word of mouth. We've done a couple of conference presentations, but like very, very little social media presence. And she's like, right, that's got to change. We've got to tell
I've been
people,
on the Troxel podcast. That's what you tell her.
I did tell her that. And I told her I'm going back on it again tomorrow. And she was like, oh, that's great. When was the last time you did it? I was like, 2022, I think. She's like, yeah, you probably need to tell people what you're doing. So that was, and we know that, right? And it's great, like the fact that we have grown to probably, 60 clients now?
Yeah, something like that.
And pretty much through word of mouth, which is great, because obviously you don't need to sell a product if someone's telling someone else how good it is, which is amazing. And big shout out to Alex from Woods Bagot, who actually did a presentation at AU this year on data metric tools or data capture tools for Revit. And if you haven't seen it, I'd advise watching it. It's a really good presentation that talks about all the different methods of capturing data. But yeah, we're relying on other people to do our marketing and sales for us, which is great. But I think we want to extend our 60 clients to be a bit bigger than that. And I think the other thing that we probably haven't touched on, well, Conrad did a little bit about the purpose of Bimbeats. So I often like reflect on what's my purpose and what I want to do. And I think it stemmed from being that frustrated BIM manager, that frustrated computational designer. And Conrad and I had a bit of a chat about this when I first took on the role. And then we started unpacking, and Conrad can probably elaborate on this, about how Conrad used to be on the Dynamo forum answering all of these questions and building Arcilab package and giving it away for free. And I'm like, there was no commercial gain for any of what Conrad was doing there. And he can elaborate on this, but it was like the fulfillment of helping someone and someone else feeling like you were helping them was far greater than any financial gain that you could make. And that was the frustration that we were having within organizations, was no matter how much effort we put in, we didn't feel like what we were doing was being recognized and rewarded for. And I guess it's probably because we didn't have a tool to measure what we were doing, and that message didn't get up to leadership about the benefits of those actions that we were doing. But I guess for me, I really want to give back through Bimbeats so that all of those frustrated BIM managers and computational designers of the world do get recognized and rewarded, because we will be able to measure the benefits that they're having for businesses, and also start looking at, they're the people that are typically the ones that are burning out and doing the longest hours, which is ironic because they are the most efficient people.
They are the work
business.
smarter.
They are your 80-20. They are your
Right.
80-20. Yet whenever I look at the wellness dashboard on any organization, typically the most overworked people are the most efficient people and the ones that are really making a difference, but it hasn't been scaled across that business. But I'm going to hand back to Conrad because I've been talking for too long. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more about why you created Arcilab and Dynamo, the Dynamo forum.
Let's take a break from the conversation to tell you about Arcol, who is helping make this episode possible. Architects should demand more out of their design tools. Imagine working on a project where architects, owners, and contractors are truly in sync. No miscommunication, no back and forth chaos, just seamless collaboration. That's what Arcol makes possible. Arcol believes teams shouldn't have to waste time switching between apps and navigating endless email threads. Your tools should work for you, not the other way around. With Arcol, you can validate ideas as you iterate your designs while keeping all your documents and people aligned. No more silos, no more guesswork, just better results. Ready to upgrade your team's design workflow? Learn more at arcol.io/TRXL. That's arcol.io/TRXL. My thanks to Arcol for supporting this episode of the podcast. And now let's get back to the conversation.
Forum.
Oh, the package? Oh, for me, it was always the learning. It's like you were explaining. There's an awesome sense of gratification. You can go on the forum and answer someone's question. That's part of it too, but you also get so much from it yourself. Sure, it's not, back in the days I wasn't working as a consultant, so it wasn't anything monetary, but if someone asks a great question that you don't know the answer to, it's, just finding out. Oftentimes, I will just like come into the office in the morning. I was still, back in my Crenshaw days, and I'll come in early and I just, spend the first 30 minutes or so just looking for an interesting question on the forum to answer. Right, and that's like something new to learn. It's like, I don't know, when you wake up and you go out for a run or a stretch or something else, just for me to stretch my brain a little bit in the morning.
It's like doing the crossword puzzle in the morning, right? It's like it's
on your right, on your right to work. Yeah, you read a book or you do a crossword puzzle or whatever. So for me, that was just like a little mental stretch or workout or whatever. You learn something new, and and that at that time was a lot of the crowd, the people that I was hanging out with, people like Mustafa, David Nanez, they were all super keen into open source software as well. So that's why Arcilab has always been open source and available online to this day.
I think back to kind of something that you both touched on, which is like Bimbeats exposes the problems, problems plural, right? I mean, it's challenge, and I think we probably talked about this on both of our previous podcasts with each one of you respectively, about a lot of people are scared to kind of even understand what the problems are because they think they're going to get in trouble, right? And so we've always kind of couched this in, no, we're looking for opportunities to improve, and if things need to be improved, like this exposes that, and now we can improve those things, right? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But I think a lot of times, and you both have alluded to this today, and I mean, I know we've had conversations about this as well, where just seeing that information is usually where people stop talking about this stuff. And because the doing it is the hard part, right? It's like implementing new software, easy. Getting people to do something differently, very, very, very difficult. And Matt, you talked about communication and kind of always bringing it up till you're sick of bringing it up, probably beyond the point at which you're sick of bringing it up. But that is literally the only way things actually happen, is if things are like the broken record, right? They're just on repeat. I think it's interesting from a communication standpoint. Something that I heard was that you basically have 6 minutes to engage with people to get them to interact in an exchange for it to have a meaningful outcome. Otherwise, they do what you talked about, Matt. They click on something else. They pull out their phone. They're doing email. Because there's no engagement there. And I think we can all look at social media or other online behavior, like you said, Matt, even like I could look at myself and see what I do, right? And you literally do what everybody else does, and we all know this, and yet we still have like this really terrible Microsoft Teams interface that we communicate over, with bad cameras, with bad microphones, with bad lighting, with people stumbling through 1,800 bullet points in a PowerPoint, right? We don't change any of that stuff to actually engage people, and then we wonder why nobody wants to do anything. And it's because they're busy, and it's because they're distracted, and it's because of all of these things. So I'm curious from like number one, yeah, you guys make a tool that really tells a story that you can then come up with strategies to overcome that. And that's where it's like you did the work, and now the work starts after you've done the work, right? Like that's when the actual work starts. And I'm curious from your standpoint, like it sounds like you got some traction in your firm, Matt, but you guys touch 60 different companies. What's working for those companies? What are you hearing? Because it's like, yeah, you can keep coming up with ways to show where issues could be and maybe connecting those dots. It's like sync times and model health and computer hardware and all, internet connections, and it's all these things, and it's personal behavior. But like, how are people actually addressing these and getting positive outcomes? Because the bigger the firm, the harder it is, right? Just because all of this stuff can be so available on an internet for somebody to just completely ignore, right? And it just gets lost in the feed at some point. So I'm really curious, like, what are you finding as ways that are actually firms are finding success trying to come up against these challenges, solve these problems?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Well, I'll try it.
Things.
I would try to answer it. Although I always keep telling Matt, or not keep telling Matt, like I've told Matt a few times, and probably a couple of other people in the past, that I'm in a weird situation, because working on the product and then working with clients in the support world, I only hear from people when they're having some kind of trouble or something's not working. So I have a skewed perspective. If someone asks me, Bimbeats is like the worst software ever, because that's literally what I get. I only get bugs and I only get issues. But that aside, every now and then, usually in person, when we're like at a conference or an event like AU, Matt mentioned Alex, so like even this year when Alex did that presentation, he also came over to our booth. We had a little stand booth thing at AU. That's when you hear some of the stories and how people are actually using the tools and how they're working. So couple of different ways I think there's that people actually action or utilize this data, and it's like what Matt was saying with ADG, that there's, you implement some kind of solution and then you're trying to communicate to people and kind of ask them. Or the other approach is you're just kind of forcing people into some kind of solution. You give them no choice but to adapt to it. So let me give you an example of what that could look like. It's let's say like Adobe. I don't want to rain on Adobe, but Adobe, the way they're licensing software has been a hurdle for a lot of companies. So this is a problem that comes up with the majority, if not most of our most of our clients that we work with when it comes to Bimbeats. It's like, what do we do about these rising costs of licensing for Adobe products? So there's a couple of different approaches that people usually take. So when we were at HOK, I remember we had the exact same problem, no Bimbeats at the time. So we send out questionnaires and ask people, is like, hey, there's this new product by Affinity called Design, Photo, and Publisher. Those are 3 competitors to Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. And they're only $50 perpetual license as opposed to $25 per user per month. So it's a massive cost difference, right? Functionality-wise, they're very similar to each other, right? So at the time at HOK, I think we sent out a bunch of questionnaires like Google Forms and ask people, hey, how much do you use Photoshop? And can we swap you over to an Affinity photo product? Everyone just, blanket tells you, they if they touch the questionnaire, they'll tell you they're using it every day and, they don't want you messing with their productivity. Standard answer.
Yeah, right.
It's like, don't touch me, right? So I've seen over the years, different companies take a different approach to this, right? So we've seen a strategy where people just automatically disable someone's license. So they use Bimbeats data, right, to look at how much have you been using a given product. And if you haven't been using your product for the last 2-3 weeks, whatever you set that metric to be, there is an automated action that disables your license, right? And then companies have intranet, Software Center is one of those solutions where they can use to kind of give you ability to download or install any other software as a replacement, right? So even though they pull in your license, they're giving you an option to replace that. So that's kind of, they leave you no choice, right? You're not using the product, we pull in your license and we're swapping you over. The other one is they pull in your license and they give you an option to get it back. So you can always, if you're on a vacation, let's say it's a false negative, you can get that license back, right? Or they just switch you over to a different product altogether. There's no in between, right? So we've seen companies with this Adobe issue, they either kind of switch the low productivity or people with low usage of a given product to a competing product because they know they're not using it a whole lot. So then, if you're opening Photoshop to resize images and change levels on an image, you can do that with, Windows Photo app or Paint, for lack of a better product. Or you can do it with Affinity as well. All of those functionalities still exist there. So if you're not using that product a whole lot, there's a cheap alternative. And then you just leave alone, your marketing department, basically, right? Because they hide users, and that's going to reflect in the data. You can easily spot someone who's in Publisher a lot. That's your marketing person. So you usually just don't touch them. And then everyone else just gets switched over, or you just switch the whole company, and they don't have a choice of getting their Adobe license back. I've seen that happen as well. All right, so there's, so you, like Matt was saying, you get a couple of options, right? Some people, ask nicely, and you kind of hope that they're going to switch over, go to Software Center, download the software, or you just automatically pull the license for them and force them to move over. So yeah, different approaches.
Let's take a quick break from the conversation to tell you about AVAIL. Is your team struggling to find the BIM assets they need? AVAIL's content management system simplifies access to all of your firm's content in one easy-to-use platform. No matter where your files live or what type of files they are, you can easily search and access them from AVAIL. Now, designers can consistently find and reuse all types of content. So what does that mean? Well, standards-compliant models and drawings are easier to create. The documentation process is less chaotic. New hires are easier to onboard. Projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. You get the idea. Visit getavail.com to try AVAIL for free and request a free demo. That's getavail.com, GETAVAIL.com. My thanks to AVAIL for supporting this episode of the Troxel podcast. And now let's get back to the conversation. I would say it's kind of sometimes it's like it literally is a business decision. I think everything that you mentioned there, it says this is a business decision, but people are attached. At least they think they're attached to, and they might even think that they're a power user, but they're just doing levels commands and moving layers around inside of Photoshop, right? Like you said, you can do that in Affinity Photo, no problem. But a lot of people, I think that they're more attached to these things than they are. And the business actually has to make business decisions. I mean, when SketchUp changed their licensing, it was a big deal. Adobe, Autodesk, there's all these companies that have made this very expensive, from a software purchasing standpoint, or just through subscription models. And businesses have to deal with that in real time, or it gets away from you. I mean, you could just get to the point, I guess, where you won't pay the bill, but it's like then you're in a real hard place because you have had no ramp up to give your staff an option to use something else, and now you feel like you're kind of a prisoner in these software packages because you literally can't have anybody use anything else because they don't know how to use anything else, and all that downtime costs way too much money. So it's really interesting that these are the things that BIM managers and IT managers have to deal with, right? And I think one of the things that I wanted to go back to that you mentioned, Matt, was this $10 million in Bluebeam usage, right? Like time being spent in Bluebeam doing a lot of repetitive things that maybe don't need to be done so repetitively. Maybe those can be automated. I'm just curious, what did you want to get that number to? Do you have a goal? Did you have a goal at ADG to get that number down to some percentage of that? And then you kind of extrapolate that naturally across different software packages in the company, right? It's like, well, how, there's a lot of reasons why Bimbeats really helps businesses understand these kinds of issues.
Yeah, our goal was 10%, and it was obviously a nice number because we were at 10 million. Let's save $1 million. It was pretty easy.
Just save 10%, not get down to spending 10% of your
just
time.
Saving
just
10%
automate 10%.
Is $1 million. So nice, easy numbers that everyone can understand. And in 6 months' time, when we've done a year worth of SmartMark, I'm going to be really interested to see what the total time and the knock-on effect. So it will be how much reduction of time we're spending in Bluebeam, but then also the reduction in time in Revit, because that's obviously the reinforcement detailing example. That was the duplication of doing it in Bluebeam and doing it in Revit. So it's going to be a reduction in Revit as well. Mm-hmm. But to Conrad's point around Adobe, 2 examples that I'll give on that. So every time we have a license renewal, I go into a Bimbeats dashboard that has every piece of software that we have that isn't a named user, and we compare running time with active time. So you can see on pieces of structural analysis software, Strand 7 as an example. It's not used very regularly, but it's used by a wide group of people. And we've got to get that number of licenses based on concurrent usage. So what typically happens is that those users will open Strand 7 at 8 o'clock in the morning, leave it open until 5 o'clock at night. So in terms of our metric of is it running on the machine, we have a board, and then right alongside it is how active it's been used.
But you know why they're doing that, right? They kind of putting a hold on a license.
Right.
If it's a floating license solution, right? They just reserve the license. Like I remember when we used to have a couple of floating, a couple of floating Rhino licenses, and all of a sudden it'll be out, and the emails start flying through the company. It's like, hey, can someone give me a Rhino license?
Yeah. So it's exactly the same thing. So we have that in our intranet across every piece of software. So when someone does try and get into a piece of software that they can't get into, it just shows who's actively in the software and who's had the software open the longest, so that we can say, okay, this is probably someone that might be able to jump out of that software. So there's two reasons for doing that. One is the psychological impact of the frustration of not being able to get into the piece of software, that we're trying to reduce that impact. And the other one, just the saving of money every single month, that the CFO is now like, I love Bimbeats because you are saving me money every single month on software licensing. Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes when we are adopting a new piece of software and the traction is good, we're actually increasing, but we're increasing when we need to increase, and we're reducing when we need to reduce. And it's based on the strategy of, are we moving to a piece of software that we know is in the direction of the strategy of the business versus a piece of software that we're not. So as an example, we decided that we were phasing out AutoCAD to move to Revit years and years ago. So we said, right, this is the date that we're going to do that handover. And from that date onwards, everybody that is a structural technician will do everything in Revit. And we gave a period of time where training was provided and everybody was up to speed. But then at a certain date, to Conrad's point, we shut it off. And it's like, now you're only in Revit, you're not in AutoCAD. And we have a number of engineers that would always go in AutoCAD to just have a look around the model, do a few markups, make a few measurements. And we said, right, BricsCAD, everything that you're doing, you can do in BricsCAD. So we did this comparison of how much it was costing us in AutoCAD when they moved to named licenses. We looked at the Flex token system and we ran this comparison, and we have 78 regular users of BricsCAD. And I can't remember what the number was, but it was tens of thousands of dollars every year that we saved by making that switch from AutoCAD to BricsCAD. But it did need the transition, it did need the training, it did need the piece around, if there's things that it's not doing that you were doing in AutoCAD, please let us know, but we feel that we can make that change. So, like, again, it comes back to the cultural piece around, we didn't just tell people, right, from tomorrow, you've got to go and learn this. You know, there is a training job number or an innovation number that you can book time to, that you can learn how to use the new piece of software. And I think from a financial standpoint, it's this, what is the long-term objective of what we're trying to do? We can't look at this in the short term, and we can't put it onto a project. So if you're on a project and your project manager says, hold on a minute, I know he's really competent in AutoCAD and now we're switching to BricsCAD, he's going to be charging to my project and my project's going to look bad. So the structure of billing is also like very different. And I think, just changing tact a little bit, but timesheets versus actual work is probably the thing that I touched on at the end of my tenure at ADG, where we were really...
But Matt, hold on a second, because on that AutoCAD to BricsCAD story, I think you're leaving out an important piece of information there, because this one touches on a piece of information that you can get by seeing actively who's using certain software and measuring how much time that software is being used. You can tailor your licensing strategy, right? AutoCAD didn't offer you floating licenses. BricsCAD did. So part of the reason you switching over is because you have people jumping in. What you were saying is like they jump in to do a few markups for a few minutes and they're jumping off. The way Flex tokens work is that you jumping into that model for 2 minutes, that gives you a license for 24 hours. You're paying for 24 hours, even if you're using it for a couple of minutes, right? So the big chunk of savings here is just realizing how the software is actually being used. You have 78 users, but you could get away with, I think you were telling me, 15 concurrent licenses for BricsCAD. And you saved from, I think you used to pay $90,000 a year for your licensing of AutoCAD, because it kills that 24-hour, like it gives you a token that's 24 hours worth of time that people only use a fraction of it. And in BricsCAD, it went down to like $23,000 a year, because now you can float them and people use them only for a few minutes and they put them back into a pool. So just being able to realize how you actually use the software, even from just the perspective of, how often or for how long of a period of time, that allows you to tailor your licensing decisions towards that. And that goes with, that goes for any other software out there. So that, the Adobe story that I was telling, that's a story about how much you're using it. And then you can safely transition people over to some other piece of software, leaving the high productivity people alone, so to speak, right? So you don't get what you were worried about. You're like, oh, they're going to be billing all this extra time because now they're less productive. They're going to be billing into my project. They're going to look my project bad. Well, no, we switch over people. They're less productive anyway because they're not using the software too much. It's not going to be a big impact. But you can do other things around this. And like, I remember when we were at HOK and we were doing this licensing thing, my manager Greg, I think at the time, they actually cut a deal with Affinity, with Serif, going back to Adobe, that they, we would switch over. It's a big company. We'll switch them over, but you guys got to put someone on call, available all day, 24/7, to support us. Right. So we're going to start transitioning people over to your software, but you're going to help us with that. You're going to get yourself a couple thousand licenses from us, right?
Yeah, no, good point. And definitely when I looked at that dashboard in terms of the time that those BricsCAD users were spending in there, we'd color coded it from 10 minutes to 2 hours, 2 hours to 4 hours, 4 to 8, and then more than 8. Like there was literally nothing more than 2 hours ever. So that 2 hours for the token flex system, I think it worked out to like $25 per hour per user. That's like,
wow.
Yeah, we can't afford to do that. So
right.
Yeah, and other software is similar story, right? So like you mentioned Bluebeam, right? There's an inherent assumption that working in Bluebeam from an engineering standpoint of view is actually being unproductive, because we know what people are doing with Bluebeam. It's manual, like laborer's work, that then gets to be redone again. So you're doing some kind of markups and somebody else has to redo that work in Revit or some other like authoring tool, right? AutoCAD, whatever that is, right? So inherently you're assuming that that's being unproductive. You can actually measure that, right? So I've actually, some of our clients come back to us and they're telling us a story where they're looking at what it is that people actually do. Do they do markups, or do they just look at PDFs, right? Because now again, you can open a PDF in a browser, free software on any Windows machine, right? You don't even need Bluebeam to do that, right? So even when they do a markup, that's from an engineering standpoint of view, maybe unproductive, but from a software purchasing standpoint of view, markups is actually what Bluebeam is supposed to be used for. And if they're in the studio session, that's actually great, right? So if they're using the software how it's meant to be used, then that's not as bad as just looking at PDFs, right? So there's like gradations to how badly you can, you need to switch people over, or retrieve licenses back or whatever.
Right. One thing I want to go back to is this idea of how granular you guys can get. And you were just talking about it, Konrad. So, I mean, you're talking about using an app, you're talking about using a computer, whatever their specs are. You guys have visibility into that. But I think it makes sense to take a minute to talk about the depth at which you can actually see what's going on, because you both have talked about, okay, is the program just open on the machine? Are they actually using it, all the way down to like, what are they doing in Bluebeam? So maybe you can give an idea of the spectrum of granularity that you're actually looking into on these machines.
Yeah, so it really depends on the application itself, right? So we have a couple of tools that look generally at any software that's running on your computer, and like Matt mentioned, the active window app that we have. So that can tell you, what kind of software you're running on the computer and whether it's actively being used. So how much time you're spending in it. To an extent, it can tell you, where you doing in it. Depending on, if it's a browser, we can kind of tell you which products in the browser you're using. But it's not a whole lot of detail, right? Like, how much time you're spending at, I don't know, ACC hub or something like that, right? But it's not going to be a whole lot of detail specifically of what you're doing inside of an ACC hub. That would require a specific integration. So we do have certain packages that we've integrated with outside of Revit, obviously. So Bluebeam is one of them. And if that given software allows you to look into specifics of what people are doing in the application, then we have that data available as well. So Bluebeam is one of those where you can see, all of the actions or transactions, as they call them, that you execute in the software. So, for Bluebeam, you can see, every markup, every comment, every document that you edit and modify, all the single actions, basically your mouse clicks in an application. We can do the same thing with things like AutoCAD, Revit, Rhino, Grasshopper. So like all of the integrations that are very specific to a software, like if you go to our website and we have a list of like specific integrations, those are the ones that we can see a lot more detail, given that the application actually allows you to dig into it through an API integration or some kind of log file that we can parse all of those actions through.
Nice.
Yeah, just touching on that further with the Bluebeam example. So in terms of the granularity, we have Viva Engage within, and I keep saying we, ADG. So a knowledge sharing community where we have channels set up to, if you've done something cool and you want to share it with someone, you put it into the community. So as an example, someone will say, oh, I found this really cool tool in Bluebeam to do legends, whatever it might be. And they can type it, hey, this is how you do this thing. And it saved me a heap of time. I used to do it like this. And then people will like the comment or reply back going, oh, I didn't know about that. That's really cool. But inside of Bimbeats, we can see, well, how many more people are now using that tool based on that community interaction and people sharing their knowledge. So I think that's probably one component that we hadn't dived deep into until I started doing this at an organizational level. It was, yes, we're capturing all of this data, but what are we going to do with it? So if you know that legend is being captured in Bluebeam, well, if someone's just put in the community that they're using that feature, who else is using it? So then we can create a dashboard of, well, let's have a look with inside the business who's taking advantages of all of these different like productivity gains. And okay, well, let's run a session on that, because right now that comment that was made in the Viva community channel is only being used by 5 people within the business. Let's do a little session on that. And what is it? So that insight from Active Window inside of Viva communities, we'll then start looking at, well, who's engaging with the Viva community? What do we need to do to create more engagement inside of the community? Because we can see who's interacting with each of the channels within Viva communities. So that's really insightful. But I think the other one, just touching back on timesheet data, because of the Active Window, essentially I do my timesheet at the end of the week using my Active Window to look at where I actually spent my time. And I've got 2 examples from clients where one client came to me and said, I've got my timesheet data and it's showing that this person here is 90% billable. So they billed to 90% of their time to this billable job. Whereas this person here is billing 50% of their time to this innovation job number. And I need to increase their utilization. They need to be back on billable work. Like, can Bimbeats help me with that? And I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely, because we can look at exactly what those 2 people are doing. And is this guy automating what he's doing or trying to automate something that would be useful on a billable project? And what it turned out was that the guy that was billing an entire day to billable work wasn't actually spending that time on billable work. And some of that time was spent surfing the net. Now, obviously, Bimbeats is not a tool that our intent is not Big Brother to check up on people. But it's worth raising because the perception of the leader of that business was that the person that was booking to the billable work was the good member of staff. Whereas what was happening was the other member of staff, when they weren't busy, were looking at ways to innovate and looking at learning new tools. And on their timesheet was recording exactly what they were doing, versus someone who was a little bit more fictitious about what they did at the end of the week. But I found it really insightful that the comment back from this project manager was, I want to get more people like this guy who's billing to my job so I know I'm charging, rather than this guy who's wasting his time, well, not wasting his time, but spending time on innovation. And I was just like, wow, like once you unpacked what was actually happening there's so much more to that story than what you saw in the timesheet.
Oh, true.
So that was one interesting one. And the other one was around a computational design leader of a business that's job was to go and look at each of the different departments within the business and look at ways of automating their traditional workflows. And he would come in and take a job on a project and bill the time that he spent to do that task. And project managers were coming back and saying, he's not billing enough hours to the job for us to on charge to the client. So like, if it takes you 2 hours, can you make sure you book what it would normally take you to do that task, because we're billing by the hour? And it was like, hold on. Like, this is crazy. You're almost saying, can you slow down? Because if you're doing these things more efficiently and more effectively, it's not looking good for us in our traditional way that we bill for the work that we and I was just like, okay, there's 2 really interesting examples that I'd never ever thought I would end up having to unpack through Bimbeats. And like, obviously that then comes back to, the whole charging model and, are we billing on value versus billing on hours? So that's a whole complete new topic.
It always makes me laugh when clients, I think you were telling me about I never even knew the software existed, the jiggle software for moving the mouse. So some people run that on their computers.
I think
there's a way to
make themselves look alive.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company AVAIL, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. If there's a way to game it, somebody will figure it out, right? And imagine the conversations going back to those people who are trying to do something innovative or actually tracking their time right, and delivering this message to them and what it does to their morale, right? It's like there's that level of this too, right? It ultimately gets down to, and then all of a sudden that person's looking for another job, right? You just took like the person who's actually doing the thing. Conrad's raising his hand. That was me, right? They're actually doing the right thing for the right reasons, and they're getting punished for it, right? It's absolutely incredible, and people wonder why the top talent doesn't want to stick around in many cases, right? It's like, well, right there you have it.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and that's why just before I left ADG, we now have the timesheet data with the Bimbeats active window data, and that project manager or a project manager can look at what was billed versus what was actually worked on. So it's very, very clear between the two, what the timesheet says and what was actually done.
Konrad, do you want to tell your story? You raised your hand, like I know you were just saying, yeah, that happened to me, but.
Yeah, I mean, it happens to a lot of people, right?
Yep.
I guess the problem is with that billing model, right? I mean, that's just not sound like, I mean, I understand why managers would look at it this way, right? I mean, their project, the people that work on their project need to bill to their projects the full amount of hours that they allocated, because that's how you invoice the client, and that's how you get paid. So people like us that we're technically overhead, or people like us that build to an overhead, design technology project number, we're not always welcome. So it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure the increase in productivity, when you're working on something that's going to automate a task, right? It's just, it's just one of those. It's just one of those things that it's helping. You just have to take the other person's word for it. And but I've definitely lived through that story, where you have to build to a proper project number,
Right.
Not some kind of research project number.
I think that this topic overall just really dovetails nicely with an episode that I did recently with an old colleague of mine around the idea of dedicated technology training in a firm. And you guys have mentioned the term a few times, digital footprint. And it's like we're getting more and more to the point where like that's the only footprint that we're actually measuring, right? Like it's all digital all the time, all the tools. I mean, of course, there's the human resources side of things, and there are other parts to a business, of course. But so much of the business of AEC depends on the digital, right? Like 100%, basically. And so at some point, we don't call it digital footprint. We just call it footprint. Just like I think at some point, you don't call it digital practice. You just call it practice, right? It's like, it's so obvious, I think, to people like you guys who are working in this every single day that like, this is how we do it. And it's the only way that we do it. We're never going back to an older way of doing it. And this only progresses forward. So dovetailing into this training idea, I'm just curious from your standpoint, how often are you guys, because we talked about the struggle of implementation, and I'm curious from your standpoint with a view into many different firms, if you could kind of give an overall health metric to the firms that are out there that actually are proactively taking it upon themselves to train their staff for new workflows, for new ways of doing things, for getting rid of the problems that you are identifying with tools like Bimbeats, where it's like, well, man, there's way better ways to do this, to the communities example that you were talking about, Matt, right? Where it's like somebody posts a tip and then you can actually see if people are, first you get like kind of the thumbs up responses to the tip, and then you get actual usage of, okay, there's a new way to do this that was way better than I knew. Because a lot of times it's just people don't know what they don't know, right? So from your standpoint, kind of a window into different firms, where would you kind of grade us on a scale, I don't know, A through F, let's just even say, or 1 to 10 of proactively training their staff so that they are progressing, so that they are developing professionally, but also raising the level of what's achievable in these businesses?
I guess the short answer to that is that we're 1 to 10 and A to F, and there is no middle ground, or there is no kind of happy medium. I think there are companies that are doing it really, really well, and I think there's companies that aren't addressing it at all. I think a lot of people think that having Bimbeats in solves all the problems, and that just by having it, all the problems go away, and that training component isn't necessarily as important as they thought it would be, or the additional work that's required. It like Bimbeats is not you put it into the system and everything magically improves. Like it still needs that training component. I would say that for Bimbeats, us partnering with organizations that provide that training is probably something that we should probably consider, because that isn't something we do. And then if that training is effective, then Bimbeats is a mechanism for measuring that effectiveness. So if companies are worried about the amount of time it takes, or the investment in training, I guess there's the investment in software and new software, there's the investment in training, but then it's that, well, measuring what was the effectiveness of the training, like, are we actually improving based on whatever that training is? So if we take the example of in-place families, you can go to the Bimbeats dashboard and say, right, these people are the most frequent in-place family users. These people are in the interiors team. They probably need some training with loadable families.
Get specific, Matt. Get specific.
It's not like it's a true story.
Start naming names.
You know, yeah.
I'm talking to you, Konrad.
But the bit that we don't do is then have that automatic, well, here's the training you need to do to improve on that thing, and then come back to say, well, okay, you're no longer doing in-place families, or the reduction of in-place families has come down. So I think we rely on the training component inside each organization, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And I think it comes back to looking at short-term financial success versus long-term health of both your business and your bottom line. And I think a lot of people get scared by the upfront investment that's required, because it isn't a quick fix, and it does take time to embed that into the culture that this is about continuous learning organization, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of people say that's what they do, but I think a lot of the time it comes back to, it takes more than just capturing the software, providing the insight. The action really comes back to training, for competency, and increasing the skill set of the individual. I think to a point, Nerva, who was on your podcast a while back, said the difference between innovation and evolving. I think sometimes I possibly have made the mistake in continuously talking about innovation and people believing that that's a nice to have, or only, a small part of the business does this. And I think it needs to change. The language needs to be, this is evolving. This is an evolution of every role. It is not a design technology group's job to do this. This is the future of an architect, the future of an engineer is complementary digital skills. Like that's what it is. And it's not, we have an innovation team that does that, and we have an architect who is creative. We have an engineer who engineers. We have a technician that draws or models. Like, I think those lines have got to blur, and they are blurring. And particularly with the ability to adopt new technology, and how much easier it is now than it was before. So I think that's really important, that training aspect. But in answer to your question, 1 to 10 and A to F, like it's really across the entire board.
Well, so one more thing I want to expand on is a little bit when it comes to training, because I remember, again, back in my BIM manager days, I was responsible for, and I remember doing this regularly with staff in the office. When we were training people on, Revit as an example at the time, right? We'll just, we'll grab 4 or 5 people that were on any given project, pick a topic for that day. I don't know, keynoting today, or, you mentioned in-place family modeling and like good practice for family modeling, or parametric modeling, whatever the case was, right? And you put them in a training room and talk them through a topic, and then they go off. A couple of things those bothering me ever since then that was wrong with that image that kind of, right now with Bimbeats you can vastly improve on, right? So first thing is, we were just blindly training everyone, right? People that are actually really good with Revit already knew those things. There was no need to waste their 30 minutes or an hour of their time by putting them through the same training session, right? So like you were saying, now you can see specifically, you can run through the entire organization and see who is making in-place families on a regular basis, right? Pick top 10 of those people in the organization, organize training for them specifically, right? That's the difference, that kind of you actually training where there is a need to be trained, right? And then the other side of this is those people were now trained. You know when that training occurred. You can track the progress from that point, from that day forwards. Are they actually changing their behavior? If they're not, bring them back into a training session until it sticks.
Turn off that license.
or kill that license. But so like it gives you that upfront, you figuring out, and so it wasn't just like I would run through the separate specific topics that I had, but they were the same topics, and with every team I just kind of ran through the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
What if in-place families were never a problem, and I just kept training everyone on in-place families? I never even knew if that's what they needed to be trained on.
You need to measure something in order to come up with the strategy to address it, right? So and that's what you have the ability to do. And I think something that Matt, you said earlier was like everybody read these gems, right? And it's like you gave it this special thing, this designation on the intranet. And it was also probably just like a really short and to the point kind of a thing. And again, like think about people's behavior, think about their attention span. And I also think about the preciousness in which a lot of training material is created, and it's like polished and it's edited so perfectly. And it doesn't have to be like that. Like it literally, I think in order to be effective, just needs to be done fast. And don't try to solve everybody's problem. Don't try to explain all of it. Like leave room for that engagement part that I talked about earlier. Ask questions afterward. Ask follow-ups. And then we can decide where we want to go next with this. But don't be super precious about creating this content. But I do think you need to create training material that lives somewhere so that people can look it up when they need it. Because live training doesn't work all the time for everybody. It's not always the right place, not always the right time. And I think, a lot of our business is like that. Like we're just filing stuff away, waiting till the day that we use it. But it's still nice to have those resources in addition to that maybe aren't so precious, but they're timely because they're there when I just need to look things up and figure out how to do things better. Or somebody posts about it and says, man, this worked for me. Here was a quick screen recording. Like, run with this and just see what happens. But I think all of these things kind of lead to, like, it doesn't even sound like effective training, but it totally is effective training. This is how people consume media these days, right? It's like the doom scrolling. It's just flipping through videos. And if you have the ability to do that in your organization with training, like that's a valuable thing for people to be filling their brains with when they're out looking for, trying to fill a little bit of time.
Yeah. And I think with this podcast, it's going to be interesting if I talk to clients saying that we've done this podcast to then look to see who listened to it for the entirety and who listened to the first 10 minutes.
Run Bimbeats analytics on the podcast listeners. I love it.
And walked out after 10 minutes because the attention span was too short.
Impossible. You're way too engaging, you guys. Well, and back to that point, like delivering, like this is very conversational. It's like I'm not doing a monologue, and there's no agenda to this podcast, right? We literally don't know what we're going to talk about next. I've said that many times on this podcast. I don't know the next words that are coming out of my mouth, and you probably don't either. And I think that alone makes it way more listenable because it's authentic. It's a conversation. And actually that reminds me, something that you were talking about, Matt, and I think we can wrap up with this, was just this whole idea of accountability in the system, right? It's like you identify the problem, you produce a little bit of training, and then you watch and you see if the behavior is changing. And again, kind of going back to maybe, when I was a Bimbeats customer at HMC, right, back in the early days of Bimbeats, and it was like, just getting the software is not enough. Okay, now we identify these things, and now we go proactively to people and we say, hey, I noticed that this isn't working for you. How can we help? that to me starts to build personal accountability, because now that we've addressed it, now we're going to be checking in on it, right? And in the organization, like as a business, we're not a family. Like families have accountability, and they're not a business. The people are not, like my son is not responsible for doing business development and bringing in money every month, right? But there's accountability there. It definitely should apply in the business, right? And so when it comes to like spending the money on the software, spending the time to do the training, following up on that, making sure it's actually landing and working, and we are getting better at doing what we do, should be totally normal. And I think like that it's just kind of a call to action to, there's a lot of people who work in these businesses who want to see accountability, but it's so hard to get that to actually happen. And I just wanted to bring it up, see if you guys had any ideas around that, because I do think that you're building a platform that enables accountability, right? I don't know how that's actually working out. I'm sure it's working. Again, it's probably all across the spectrum, right? There's some that are really good at it and some that are really bad at it. But it is something to really take notice of and learn how to use that leverage in the business so that things actually do get better over time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll go back to Nate's article that he published this morning, where he talks about the accountability isn't just on the tech people or the person that is responsible for innovation within a business. Like, that's not enough. And I think it's 84 or 86% of digital transformations fail. And I think it comes back to that accountability where, yes, the accountability for the strategy sits with the chief digital officer, but executing that strategy is the accountability of everyone within the organization, and it has to be both bottom up and top down. And I think quite often the bit in the middle gets missed. I think at kind of leadership level and C-suite, you come up with what you think is a business strategy that aligns with your digital strategy, and everybody is in agreement with that. You have young, passionate people who, at an individual level, who want to do it. But then the project directors and the national discipline leads who have all these other things that they have to worry about. And, essentially all of this still comes back to commercial gain, and commercial gain, whether that is retaining someone that hasn't left the business and the cost of getting someone else in if someone leaves. For me, everything still comes back to a commercial benefit to the business. But and this is probably a good way to finish. And this comes back to what we spoke about last time, Evan, about it's the health of the business and the health of the people. And if you've got healthy people, you have a healthy business.
Well said. Konrad, any final thoughts when it comes to this?
Yeah. I mean, so you guys said a few times that you get the data, but it's up to you what you're going to do with this, right? So this transparency cuts both ways, right? So you can do positive things or you can do negative things with it. And oftentimes in some of the examples that we've had with that I've seen with clients, some of the stories they tell us is, people get used to it. Right? It's it might feel like it's a little, I don't know, a little too much in the beginning, but I've had some clients tell us that they had this workflow set up where IT was getting emailed with a list of computers that need to be updated because they're on the outdated version of some software or whatnot. They were getting these automated emails from Bimbeats every week. And originally they would get a little annoyed, a little pissed off in the beginning because it's like, hey, you just keep sending me this stuff. I know I have to do this, but that over time they got used to it. But it created that accountability that we just talked about, right? It's like, you're not gonna keep getting those emails if you actually get out there and get those updates pushed out, and people get used to it, right? So it's not. I'm actually on the personally, I think that that you can throw more responsibilities at people, and that's a good thing. They usually respond in a very positive way. So having that kind of data, having that kind of information that allows you to expect and demand more from people is a good thing. That's a positive. I like to see that. The companies that I worked at back in the days, I'd be excited.
Agreed. And I think obviously people want to show up. I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think most people show up and they want to do a good job.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah,
love to
exactly.
know how they can do their job better. And so kind of going into those conversations with that attitude and just saying, hey, like I noticed this. This is a struggle. Yes, no, like give me some feedback. Tell me what this is like for you. That's a great way to enter into these conversations, right? Give them the benefit of the doubt, of course. And I know a lot of people. There's definitely an IT people out there. I mean, there's people. You blamed the interior designer for making in place families, so I'm blaming the IT people for the way they approach conversations sometimes. Like Conrad, you even talked about this with your role emerging and evolving through time. It's like you had to deal with people in your role at Bimbeats, right? And it's like, oh, like how do I do this, right? It's not natural necessarily for people on the technology side for communication skills or for interpersonal skills or soft skills or however you maybe want to put it. And there's training out there for that too, right? You can learn those skills. And so I think just saying a few of those things out loud, it's like, let's just actually step back and remember, like people do want to do a good job. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's all get better together, kind of a thing, and understand your purpose in this business. Again, getting back to this business use case, so that we're all on the same team, pushing forward. All of those are kind of like regrounding, kind of maybe cliches, but at the same time, like I think it's worth saying those because I think a lot of times some technology people lose sight of those things and they just go in guns blazing and they're because they're fed up and they've keep having to deal with the same things over and over again, or they're only dealing with the crap, Conrad, right? Like all I get are bug reports. All I get are the negatives, right? And so like, let's just remember, like we're talking about people. We're talking about people who in architecture generally are up for a challenge. Like you were just saying, Conrad, it's like, man, you want to start every day with a little challenge, right? And get your brain working. So all of those things, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think those are all worth saying, especially if you're in a leadership position, like to really instill in your team who's going to be having these conversations with people is like treat people with respect, treat people as people, and build accountability the right way, right? Not just the guns blazing kind of a way.
Yeah. Presenting these things as opportunities and, just being able to recognize them afterwards too. That's like an important part of it too. Like people will step up to a challenge. They'll try to do a good job. That's I don't know. That's like a default mode of operation for with the folks that I used to work with, and I believe that's how most of people are. But you have to be able to recognize them afterwards too. So
absolutely.
So long as you're doing that, they're gonna be just fine.
I just wanted to end on one thing, just because it made me think about the hybrid work situation and flexible work of should we be in the office, should we be at home? And I don't have the answer to this, but I want to give a shout out to Harvard because Harvard put me onto a book called Outcomes, Not Outputs. And I think if we look at that, then using Bimbeats data and anecdotal evidence as well, that measure on outcomes, don't measure on output. Like, because there are stories of you're working from home, you're only doing 6 hours a day today. You're not doing the 8 hours when you come in the office. Who cares? What's the outcome? And I think we need to move forward looking at outcomes, not output. And it probably relates back to that booking 2 hours to the job rather than 6 hours because you did 6 hours worth of work. I think focusing on outcomes needs to be the way that we move forward. And if you're judging hybrid working, judge on output. Outcomes, not output.
Yeah, it goes right back. Another dovetail into our previous conversation, Matt, right? Healthy people, healthy business, right? Absolutely. So, well, thank you both for taking the time to catch us up on what's been going on with Bimbeats, and it's been a wonderful conversation. I hope we can do it again in the future. Let's not wait 4.5 years, Conrad, till the next time. But Matt, congrats on your new role. I hope you can do wonders with scaling Bimbeats, and I wish you both the best. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with me. Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to our members this week. Find out how you can become a member at trxl.co, and I'll talk to you again next week.